Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you this morning. This morning I got up and I had a very easy choice of how to get here. I live on 35th between Powell and Division. I got on my bike and I rode to the Hollywood station. I just had time to check the schedule and train arrived. And I got here in 50 minutes, including the bike ride. And I had a small amount of exercise, not enough to offset the 2 sweet rolls I just ate. But what you've done is built a different way of living by increasing choices for people like me that certainly didn't exist when I was a child here. And the expansion of the system that's gone on steadily, despite the severe handicap of not having a dedicated funding source for these big infrastructure investments, is very impressive. And I thank you, I thank Fred, I thank Neil McFarland, all the staff for what you've done, and having really achieved something that's pretty remarkable for a mid-sized metro region to have this scope. And I also want to include the bus service and the continual refinement of the bus service, because that's still a workhorse for a lot of people, and it would not be the same system without that. I appreciated the ability to work with your staff on the Portland-Milwaukee light rail line, and I want to say that I was especially impressed by the work on the bridge of the Willamette, which is a very expensive item, and Carlotta and I, whose districts join each other, I represent sort of the core of the region and she's to the south, we're worried about the expense of that bridge and what it might mean for the length of the line, and that's clearly a trade-off. And what we ended up with in this region, thanks to the work that was done by TriMet, is a more beautiful bridge that is substantially cheaper than I certainly expected, and by the way, it costs about half as much as the proposed Selwood Bridge. So you deserve all of our thanks for what you're doing to build a better region. I want to talk a little bit about this, our common enterprise, about the future of the region, which we call making the greatest place, and parts that might be of interest to you. First, one of the things that's happened, and TriMet's played a role in this, is the way we grow in this region has changed fundamentally, perhaps radically, in the last 11 years. The urban growth boundary was established in 1979. We've added about 25,000 acres to it subsequently under the impetus of state law and state law requirements. In the last 11 years, 95% of the new homes, apartments, condos, single-family homes, have been built inside the 1979 urban growth boundary. And the pattern clearly reflects bus routes as well as light rail lines. We had a national expert here speaking about this and said, you won't find this anywhere else in the United States, that the growth is really distributed much more evenly inside the existing established communities and not at the edge. That is fundamentally different. What is the consequences for you? It makes bus service feasible as we use land more efficiently and grow more compactly. And that's not true in other places. You can't provide bus service at low densities. It doesn't work without huge subsidies. They're not realistic. The other thing it does, it means that communities get reinvestment instead of being abandoned. And having a whole and solid community is a great thing for everyone. So we no longer talk about a strategy about growing up and growing out, at least I don't. We're doing it. And I believe for a variety of factors, including the expense of trying to grow at the edge, which is very substantial, $60,000 to $100,000 per house to build the roads, the sewers, the schools, the community facilities. The money we frankly don't have in most of the region. That combined with people's preferences to live in established neighborhoods that have a mixture of uses means that we will continue to do this. And having the investments that you're making be part of our planning helps make the community more successful by giving people more opportunities in how they travel. One of the things that you'll see when you read all 1,700 pages of our report,
which we're sure you will,
is I would call your attention to a document that begins on page 314, and that actually is the page number. We did an analysis of housing affordability and forecasts and where people will live. Now, for the first time, and I believe this is going to be of national significance because the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development has a copy of this report, and they will be cooperating with the Department of Transportation to think about integrating transportation investments and housing policy, is that what people can afford to pay for the house depends in large part on how much they're spending on transportation. It's the second largest component of household expense. It runs from 15 to about 30%. And what you have left over is what you can spend on the house. Now, we looked at what places would be affordable, and affordability is determined in part by where transit is. So how we plan transit lines affects where people can live and where they can afford to have a house. Tiffany, of course, would understand all about this, as well as some of the other elements about creating a complete community. So this is actually, I suggest that you take a look at that, and I'm going to come back to that briefly at the end. Next, about your proposed regional transportation plan amendments. I'll vote for them. I might try and one-up you on the share of trips to be made by biking, walking, and transit, and the reason for that is that legislation passed in the 2009 legislature calls for Metro to develop an integrated land use and transportation plan that will help get us to our goals for reducing greenhouse gases. Now, it's very popular now to set goals. Meeting them is going to be extremely difficult, and we just saw some analyses from our staff in the last 2 weeks that shows how tough that's going to be. If we're serious about this, obviously transit is going to be playing a huge role, as well as how we design communities so that people can choose to walk if they wish. But you have my full support for your proposed amendments. I'm going to introduce an amendment myself with regard to the regional transportation plan, that given the fact that we recognize that an investment in transit should be coordinated with investments in new development, that we're building communities. And under Carlotta's leadership, and she's talked about her work with high-capacity transit, she's also chair of the Joint Policy Advisory Committee on Transportation, is that communities that wish to have the investment in light rail, and how far we've come is that people are competing to get light rail. That comes with a responsibility to build a community that takes advantage of transit. My amendment is going to say we need to go a little deeper, which is who's going to benefit from that development, and do we have communities that are building housing choices? Or are we building communities that only serve parts of the population? And this is not just about low income or high income, but about both and middle income. And that we need to expect communities that ask for investments to make sure that the development that comes with transit serves a variety of incomes, and that they build more complete communities. Because as you'll see if you start reading at page 314, we have a polarization in the region. We have low-income areas that look like they're going to get a little poor, and we have affluent areas that look like they're going to get a little more affluent, and we just heard in the last 2 days, we have sharply increasing levels of segregation in our schools across the region. It's not a Portland phenomenon. So I think one of the advantages we can have, that linking transit and investments in new development in private and public sectors, we can have more complete communities. Finally, with regard to our soon to be made decisions on things like urban reserves, I think it would be very helpful, given that this is a very high profile decision and you have a representative on the Metro Policy Advisory Committee, if you decided whether or not you're going to have a position on urban reserves, on the amount and location and their use. Because I think it's a little hard for Mr. Van Beveren to be involved in the discussion unless he's had guidance from you, and perhaps you've already had this discussion. But if not, I would suggest that that would be a good topic for you to discuss and allow him to represent you on that issue. Or you can give him a break and tell him he doesn't have to. But in any event, this is an area of a lot of focus of concern, and it goes to the heart of our strategy. So that would be an important issue if you wish to develop a position. Think about doing so relatively soon. And once again, thank you for the opportunity to address you.
Oh, thank you all.